Nia was a young woman from Arusha, Tanzania, known for her gentle spirit and warm smile. She had grown up with dreams of love, the kind of love that made her believe in happy endings. When she met Bako, a man everyone admired, it felt as if those dreams were finally coming true. Bako was a successful businessman, respected for his charm and generosity. To Nia, he seemed perfect, a man who would protect her, cherish her, and give her the future she had always imagined. Their wedding day was nothing short of magical. The sun shone brightly over Arusha, casting a golden glow on the celebrations. Family and friends gathered from near and far, dressed in colorful fabrics that shimmered as they danced and sang. The sound of drums and laughter filled the air, mixing with the aroma of spiced foods being served at long tables. The couple stood side by side, radiant and full of promise, as blessings were spoken over them. Every guest seemed to believe they were witnessing the beginning of a love story that would last forever. Nia's heart swelled as she looked at Bako during the ceremony. His smile was steady, his words smooth and confident. When he slipped the ring on her finger, she felt as if she was stepping into a fairy tale. She told herself she was the luckiest woman alive, chosen by a man so admired. That night, as the music faded and the guests departed, Nia believed with all her heart that her journey of happiness had just begun. The night that was supposed to be the happiest of her life quickly turned into a memory Nia wished she could erase. After the laughter of the wedding faded and the last of the guests had gone home, she found herself alone with Bako in their decorated bridal suite. The room was filled with flowers, candles, and soft music. Everything looked perfect, yet inside, Nia carried a nervous excitement. She wanted to talk to her new husband about their future, about their dreams, the family they might build, the places they could travel, and the life they could share together. Bako, however, was not the man she had imagined that night. He had been drinking heavily during the celebrations, and by the time they were alone, his eyes were glazed and his words sharp. Still, Nia smiled gently and tried to reach him, believing that love meant opening their hearts to each other. She softly asked about their plans, about how they would work together in their marriage. But instead of listening, Bako's face hardened. He frowned, and his voice grew cold as he told her that in this marriage, only his rules mattered. Confused and hurt, Nia tried to explain herself. She thought marriage was about two people, about sharing decisions and supporting one another. Her voice trembled but remained calm. That was when Bako's hand struck her face, the sound echoing in the silence of the room. For a moment, time froze. Nia stood still, her cheek burning from the slap, her eyes wide with disbelief. This was her wedding night, the night she had dreamed of since she was a girl, and the man she had just vowed to love had humiliated her with violence. Her tears came fast, soaking into her bridal dress as she sat down on the edge of the bed. She tried to understand what had just happened, but the shock was too heavy. She looked at Bako, hoping he would show regret, but instead he leaned back carelessly, sipping from his glass and warning her not to ever question him again. The gentleness she thought she saw in him before was gone, replaced by arrogance and cruelty. That night, Nia's heart shattered. The man admired by everyone, the man she had trusted, had revealed a dark side she had never imagined. The fairy tale she believed in only hours ago had turned into a nightmare. Alone in that decorated room, surrounded by the scent of roses and the sound of her own quiet sobs, Nia realized her life had changed forever. She pressed her face into her hands, her tears staining the white fabric of her gown, and whispered to herself a question that cut deep. Who is this man I married? In that moment, she knew the truth. Bako was not the prince she thought he was. He was a stranger, and she was trapped in a story she had never chosen. The night of the wedding ended in tears, and before Nia could even gather her strength, Bako's voice cut through her pain like an... He stood over her, cold and unshaken, and said, "Don't ever speak of this, or you'll regret it." His words weren't shouted. They were calm, controlled, and terrifying. It was a warning, a threat wrapped in confidence, and it sank into Nia's heart like a heavy stone. She wanted to scream, to call for help, to tell someone what had happened, but his eyes told her he would not hesitate to hurt her again if she dared. The next morning, sunlight poured into their room as if the world itself had no idea of the darkness that had fallen on Nia's life. Bako got up, dressed neatly, and acted as though nothing had happened. He smiled at her like a proud husband, kissed her forehead, and even joked with the relatives who stopped by to congratulate. To everyone else, he was the perfect groom, polished, charming, respectful. But Nia sat quietly, her cheeks still stinging from the slap, her body frozen by fear. Her family noticed nothing. When her mother hugged her and asked if she was happy, Nia forced a smile and nodded. She couldn't bring herself to speak the truth. How could she? Everyone adored Bako. They believed she had married a man who would give her the world. If she spoke, who would believe her? Who would understand that the man who gave expensive gifts and greeted people with warmth could also be the man who broke her heart on their wedding night? So she kept silent. She laughed when others laughed, she posed for photos, she let people talk about how lucky she was. But inside, she was crumbling. Each time she remembered his hand striking her face, she felt smaller. Each time she heard his warning in her head, her voice grew quieter. It was as if a wall was rising inside her, separating who she was on the outside from who she was on the inside. At night, when the house was quiet, she let her tears fall onto her pillow. She whispered questions into the darkness. Why me? Why now? How can love turn into this so fast? The shame was heavy, pressing down on her chest. She blamed herself even though deep inside she knew she had done nothing wrong. Still, she carried the guilt as if speaking up would only bring disgrace to her family. But buried deep beneath her silence was a flicker of something stronger. Each time she replayed his words, "Don't ever speak of this," a small fire lit inside her. It was faint, but it was there. And one night, through her sobs, she whispered back to herself, "I will not stay silent forever." She didn't know when or how, but she knew her voice would rise again. For now, she kept her pain hidden, but in her heart, a seed of courage had been planted. The first slap on her wedding night had been only the beginning. As the weeks passed, Nia began to see that Bako's temper was not a moment of drunken weakness. It was who he truly was. He became harsher, more demanding, and quicker to anger. What started as sharp words behind closed doors soon spilled into the open. He insulted her in front of his friends, mocking her opinions as if her thoughts had no value. At family gatherings, he made jokes at her expense, and people laughed, thinking he was being playful. Nia forced a smile to hide her humiliation, but inside she felt herself breaking piece by piece. Bako controlled everything she did. He decided what she wore, who she could talk to, and when she could leave the house. If she wanted to visit her parents, he always had an excuse to stop her. He checked her phone, questioned her about her conversations, and grew angry if she spoke to anyone too long. Slowly, he isolated her from the people she loved most. The girl who once had friends to laugh with, family to lean on, and dreams she loved to share now found herself trapped in silence, cut off from the world. But even in the cage Bako built around her, Nia found a way to hold on to herself. Late at night, when he slept, she began writing everything down in a small, hidden journal. Every slap, every cruel word, every bruise she carefully covered with makeup. She wrote down dates, times, and exact words he used when he threatened her. The pages filled quickly, stained sometimes with her tears, but they became her way of fighting back, quietly, secretly. Writing gave her a strange sense of power, as if each word she recorded was proof that she still existed, that her story mattered, and that one day the truth would be seen. Her body carried the marks of his anger, but her spirit, though shaken, refused to die. With every entry she wrote, a thought grew stronger inside her. This would not last forever. She could not say it aloud yet, but in her heart, she was preparing. She began hiding small pieces of evidence. Photos of her bruises, scraps of conversations she managed to record on her phone, receipts from hospital visits she secretly went to. It was dangerous, and she knew if Bako found out, his rage would be unbearable. But the risk didn't stop her. On the surface, she remained the quiet, obedient wife everyone thought she was. She lowered her eyes when he barked at her. She stayed silent when he shouted. She played her role. But behind that mask, Nia was gathering her strength in silence. Each bruise was a reminder. Each insult was fuel. She didn't know when the day would come, but she knew one thing for certain. One day she would rise, and when she did, Bako would never see it coming. The dinner in Dar es Salaam was supposed to be a joyful family gathering. Relatives had come together to celebrate Bako's latest business success, and the long table was filled with laughter, stories, and plates of food that smelled of spices and home. Everyone seemed proud of him, clapping his back, praising his achievements. Nia sat quietly at his side, smiling when expected, though her heart was heavy as always. As the evening went on, Bako began to drink, and with each glass, his tone grew sharper. When Nia tried to add a small comment to the conversation, he cut her off loudly, mocking her word. "What does she know about business?" he sneered, making others chuckle uncomfortably. Then he joked about how she couldn't even cook his favorite dish properly, rolling his eyes as though she were a child. The table laughed nervously, not realizing the cruelty in his voice, but Nia's face burned with shame. She lowered her gaze to her plate, wishing she could disappear. For most of the night, no one said anything. People were used to Bako's commanding presence, and didn't dare question him. But Tay, Nia's cousin, noticed something others did not. The emptiness in her eyes, the way she flinched at Bako's words, the forced smile she wore like a mask. When the dinner ended and everyone was leaving, Tay quietly pulled her aside. "Nia," he said gently, "what's going on? You don't look happy. I saw the way he spoke to you. This isn't right." At first, Nia shook her head, denying it. She wanted to stay silent, just as she always had, afraid of what might happen if she let the truth out. But Tay wouldn't let go. His voice softened, his eyes full of concern. "You don't have to hide it from me. I'm your family. Tell me." Those words broke something inside her. For the first time since her wedding night, Nia let the walls around her crumble. Her voice cracked as she whispered the truth. She told him about the slap on their wedding night, the insults, the bruises hidden under her clothes, the threats that kept her silent. Her tears flowed as she spoke, and the weight she had carried alone for so long spilled into the open. Tay listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening in anger, but his voice stayed calm. When she finished, he held her hand and said firmly, "You don't deserve this, Nia. You have to fight back. Don't let him destroy you. There are laws to protect you, and there are people who will stand by you. You're not alone anymore." For the first time, Nia felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. Someone believed her. Someone saw her pain. And in that moment, surrounded by the noise of departing guests and the city lights outside, she felt a small but powerful shift inside. She wasn't just a victim anymore. With Tay's words echoing in her heart, Nia realized she had a choice: to keep suffering in silence or to rise and fight. Nia's talk with Tay stayed in her mind long after that dinner. For years she had carried her pain alone, but now someone knew the truth, and it felt like a door had opened. Tay didn't let her retreat back into silence. Within days, he connected her with a woman who had helped many others in situations like hers, Ms. Kendi, a lawyer known for fighting fearlessly for women's rights. The first time Nia met her, she was trembling. She worried that no one would believe her, that her story would be dismissed as just marriage problem. But Ms. Kendi listened with steady eyes and never once doubted her. She told Nia, "You are not weak. What you've done, surviving this long, shows strength. Now we're going to turn that strength into action." For the first time in a long while, Nia felt like she wasn't invisible. They began collecting evidence. Nia brought out the hidden journal she had been writing in for months, the one filled with dates, words, and drawings of bruises she was too ashamed to show anyone. She also showed the photos she had secretly taken, the ones that revealed the marks on her skin when Baco wasn't looking. Together they went through medical reports from hospital visits where she had pretended to fall or make excuses for her injuries. Most powerful of all were the recordings, moments when Baco's voice turned sharp and cruel, threatening her if she ever spoke up. Each piece of evidence was painful to look at, but also powerful. As Nia handed them over, she realized she was slowly reclaiming her voice. Every page of the journal, every photograph, every word recorded was proof that she had not imagined it, proof that she had endured something real and terrible. With Ms. Kendi's encouragement, Nia began to see herself not as a helpless victim, but as a survivor preparing to fight back. Filing the case was not easy. The day she signed the papers, her hands shook. She thought of what people would say, how her family might react, how Baco would surely try to destroy her name. Fear whispered in her ear, but courage was louder now. She remembered the night she had whispered to herself, "I will not stay silent forever," and she knew this was the moment she had been waiting for. When the court accepted her case, Nia felt a rush of emotions, fear, relief, and determination all at once. She was stepping into a battle against a man admired by many, a man with money, power, and influence. But for the first time since her wedding, she no longer felt trapped. She wasn't alone anymore. She had her cousin, her lawyer, and most importantly, she had herself, the part of her that had refused to break no matter how much Baco tried to crush her. Walking out of the lawyer's office that day, Nia lifted her head higher than she had in months. The road ahead would not be easy, but she had finally taken the first step toward freedom and justice. The day of the trial arrived, and Nia felt the weight of it in her chest as she entered Mwanza High Court. The building loomed tall, its walls carrying the stories of countless battles for truth and justice. This was her turn. She walked in quietly, her hands trembling but her steps steady. She had dreamed of this day for months, both with fear and with hope. Baco was already there, dressed in a sharp suit that gleamed under the light. He stood tall, smiling as if he were the most important man in the room. His lawyers, dressed in confidence as much as in their black robes, surrounded him like armor. He laughed and shook hands with people he knew, glancing at Nia with a mocking smirk. To him, the trial was just a show, and he believed he was untouchable. When the proceedings began, his lawyers wasted no time. They painted him as a respected businessman, a loving husband, and a victim of lies. They claimed Nia was bitter, that she had made up stories to ruin his reputation. Their voices were strong, their words carefully chosen, and some in the courtroom nodded along, already convinced. Baco leaned back in his chair, smirking, as if victory was certain. But Nia did not flinch. She sat straight, her face calm, her eyes fixed on the judge. Inside, her heart raced, but she remembered Ms. Kendi's words. "Do not let him see your fear. Truth will speak louder than his arrogance." So she stayed silent, waiting. When it was her turn, she rose slowly, her voice soft but clear. She did not fight their lies with anger, she fought with patience. She told her story piece by piece, her words steady like stones being laid to build a wall. She spoke of her wedding night, of the first slap, of the threats that silenced her, of the bruises she hid. The courtroom was quiet, the air thick with her pain. Some looked at her with pity, others with doubt. Baco scoffed loudly, shaking his head as if she were ridiculous. He whispered jokes to his lawyers, pretending he was already free of blame. But Nia refused to let his arrogance shake her. She knew the time would come when the truth she carried would crush his confidence. As the day went on, Ms. Kendi guided her with care, asking the right question, making sure Nia's truth was heard clearly. Each answer she gave felt like a crack in the mask Baco wore. Still, he smiled. Still, he acted like the king of the room. By the time court adjourned for the day, the battle lines were clear. Baco had his wealth, his charm, and his lawyers. Nia had her voice, her courage, and the truth waiting in her evidence. She walked out of the courtroom that evening with her head high. The fight had only just begun, but she knew, when the right moment came, Baco's pride would not be enough to save him. The second week of the trial brought the moment Nia and her lawyer had been waiting for. Up until then, Baco had carried himself with the same arrogance, walking into court each day as if he were above everyone else. He smiled, joked with his lawyers, and shook hands with his supporters who came to watch. He acted untouchable, as though Nia's words alone could never harm him. But this day was different. This was the day the evidence would speak louder than all his denials. The courtroom was tense as Ms. Kendi stood up, her presence calm but powerful. She looked at the judge and said, "Your Honor, today we will present clear proof of the abuse Nia endured." Her words sent a ripple of anticipation through the room. Baco leaned back in his chair, smirking, as though nothing could shake him. The first piece of evidence was an audio recording. The room grew quiet as the sound of Baco's voice filled the speakers. His tone was sharp, filled with venom, as he threatened Nia. Everyone could hear the anger, the arrogance, the chilling words. "If you ever speak of this, you'll regret it." The silence that followed was heavy. People glanced at one another, some covering their mouths in shock. For the first time, Baco shifted in his chair, his smile fading just slightly. Then came the photos. Ms. Kendi carefully placed them before the court, clear images of bruises on Nia's arms, her cheek, her back. Each picture told a story no one could deny. Gasps echoed across the room as people stared at the evidence. Some who had once admired Baco now looked at him with disgust. He looked down, adjusting his tie nervously, his confidence beginning to crack. Next were the medical certificates. Doctors' reports confirmed the injuries, fractures, swollen skin, deep bruises, that matched the dates in Nia's journal. It was no longer just her word against his. It was her truth backed by cold, undeniable facts. Finally, Ms. Kendi revealed the details from Nia's journal. She read entries aloud, Nia's own words written on nights filled with tears and fear. The entry from the wedding night silenced the courtroom completely. It described the slap, the humiliation, and the warning Baco had given her. Hearing those words, in her handwriting, made the pain real for everyone sitting there. By now, Baco's mask of arrogance was slipping fast. His lawyers shuffled papers, whispering frantically. His supporters looked uneasy. And Baco himself, once so confident, sat stiff and pale. He no longer smirked at Nia. He no longer laughed. For the first time, he looked like a man cornered by the truth. Nia sat quietly, her hands clasped in her lap. She didn't gloat, she didn't glare at him. She simply let the evidence speak. The truth was finally out in the open, and the whole room had seen it. In that moment, she knew the tide was turning. Baco was no longer untouchable. His downfall had begun. The day of the verdict arrived with heavy air. The courtroom was packed, people filling every seat and standing along the walls. Reporters waited with their notebooks ready, and family members held their breath. Nia sat quietly, her palms pressed together, her heart pounding. She had lived through months of pain, silence, and fear. Now everything rested on the judge's word. Baco entered with the same expensive suit, but he no longer walked with the same proud stride. The arrogance that once lit up his face had dulled. His eyes darted around the room, avoiding the stares of those who once admired him. The recordings, the photos, the medical reports, all of it had stripped away the image he had built for himself. He sat down stiffly beside his lawyers, trying to mask his worry, but the cracks were clear for everyone to see. When the judge finally spoke, the room fell silent. His voice was steady, strong, and carried through the hall like a hammer striking stone. Marriage is not ownership. Violence has no place here. A husband is not a master, and a wife is not property. This court will not excuse cruelty behind the mask of marriage. The words pierced the air, and Nia felt her chest rise with a deep, trembling breath. For so long she had waited for someone in authority to say what she had always known in her heart. She deserved dignity, she deserved respect, she deserved peace. The verdict followed. Baco is found guilty of assault and domestic abuse. Gasps filled the room. Some nodded in approval, Others shook their heads in disbelief. Bako's shoulders slumped, and his lawyers lowered their eyes, knowing there was no way out. The judge continued, outlining the punishment: prison time, fines, and the loss of privileges that once gave him power. His businesses would crumble, his reputation would collapse, and his freedom would be taken from him. The man who once seemed untouchable was now just another criminal facing justice. Nia closed her eyes, and for the first time in years she felt something wash over her, relief, pure and fresh, like rain falling on dry soil. The tears that rolled down her cheeks weren't from fear this time. They were from freedom. She had fought for her voice, and it had been heard. She had stood against the man who tried to silence her, and she had won. Bako sat frozen, unable to accept what had happened. The man who once commanded rooms with his charm now sat small and defeated. Nia didn't look at him with anger or revenge. She simply looked forward, ready to walk out of that courtroom into a new light. As she stepped outside, the sunlight touched her face. The storm she had carried for so long was finally lifting. Justice had come, and with it, the beginning of her healing. Nia stepped out of the courthouse with the sun shining warmly on her face. The chains of fear that had weighed her down for so long were gone. She was no longer the quiet, broken woman who once cried alone in her bridal dress. She was stronger now, her spirit unshaken, her voice finally free. Every step she took outside those doors felt like a victory, not just for herself, but for every woman who had ever been silenced. In the weeks that followed, Nia began to rebuild her life. Instead of hiding, she chose to speak. She started meeting with women who had faced similar abuse, listening to their stories and sharing her own. She worked with organizations to create safe spaces for those trapped in violent homes. Her pain had become her purpose, and her scars turned into a source of strength for others. The same journal where she once wrote her tears now became a tool to teach women that their voices mattered, their lives mattered, and they were never alone. Meanwhile, Bako sat behind bars, stripped of his wealth, his pride, and his power. The man who once stood tall and untouchable now stared at the cold walls of his cell, shocked that his own arrogance had led him here. The image he had built for himself was destroyed forever. Nia, standing before a group of women one evening, said the words that had burned in her heart since that first night. He thought a slap would silence me. Instead, it became his downfall. And with that, her story was no longer just her own. It became a light for others, a reminder that silence can break, and when it does, justice can rise.